Afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this afternoon's Wild Chat. My name is Jeanne Tarrant. I'm the manager of the Threatened Amphibian program, and today I'm going to be talking about the Whitley Award that I recently won and talking about the project that funding is going to support. So I am not going to get very technical. I'm going to show a lot of photos, give you a bit of my background and how I end up working in frogs. Just some groundkeeping rules to begin with. You can see the screen on your screen at the moment. So please keep microphones muted and your videos off to avoid any disturbance during the presentation. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A box. You can type your question in there, and then I'll read those out and answer them as we go. So it's 3 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. All right, so as I mentioned, today I'm talking about the Whitley Award. It's known as the Green Oscar in conservation, and I was one of 6 winners this year. The Whitley Fund for Nature is a UK-based organisation, and they fund grassroots conservationists from around the developing world, particularly Asia, South America, and Africa. And yes, I'm very fortunate this year to be the recipient of one of these awards for 2020. So just a bit about me and how I got into conservation. So I was fortunate enough to grow up in Endangered, in the southern Drakensberg, and was surrounded by nature and farmlands while I was growing up. A lot of interaction with animals, as you can see, mostly of the mammalian persuasion, quite protective over these, and really just growing up in this environment nurtured my love for nature and for animals. At one stage I wanted to become a vet, but then as time went on, my interest grew more and more in conservation itself. To be honest with you, I did not think that that would actually directly involve frogs. Growing up, I did not like frogs. I thought frogs were pretty scary. So to end up with an entire career based on frogs, you may be asking how that happened. And so I'm going to talk a bit more about how I ended up actually being very happy in the space of wearing waders and tromping around wetlands and looking for small slimy creatures, mostly at night. So it's a really interesting part of the work that we do, and my own transformation in that. You know, there's a lot of myths and superstitions associated with frogs, especially in South Africa and in Europe, where there's a lot of association of witchcraft with frogs, and these strange slimy creatures that come out at night, and you know, the fears and myths associated with them. Or on the other hand, really positive things associated with frogs. Many places revere frogs and see them as positive symbols. And so this is a really interesting part of my work and a process that I myself have been through to end up where I am today. So aside from the sort of cultural interest in frogs, why frogs? Why are they important, and why have I chosen a career in them? So amphibians as a group, of course frogs belong to amphibians, have been around for a very, very long time. Their common ancestor literally crawled onto land around 350 million years ago, and this group has diversified and evolved to cover every part of the earth. They inhabit every niche of the planet other than Antarctica, where it's too cold for them, and other than a few islands that they haven't managed to colonize. But otherwise they're a hugely successful group of over 8,000 different species found all around the world. But they are now the most threatened class of vertebrate on the planet. The latest IUCN, so the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, assessments show that 41% of our amphibians around the world are threatened with extinction. Of these, 43%, so nearly a half of these 8,000 species are actually experiencing population declines. And in the last 40 years or so, scientists have observed the complete disappearance or extinction of around about 168 species, which is actually just phenomenal and way above what we call the natural background extinction rate. And all of this is really a reflection of the health of our freshwater systems. And really what I keep saying to everyone is that it's a real warning that the health of our planet is not what it should be. So 41% globally threatened, and in South Africa, the proportions are quite similar. That little graph on the bottom shows you our threatened species, critically endangered being the red bar in the circle, endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, and data deficient. And so we have a huge number of frogs in South Africa that are also endemic, in other words, that only occur in South Africa. And of those endemic species, you see that about half of those are within the threatened categories. So our problem in South Africa of threatened species mirrors that that's happening globally. So aside from the depressing negative part of things, that these frogs really need our help, it's been an incredible journey for me to learn about frogs, and going from just thinking that a frog was a frog to realize incredible diversity, this amazing evolution into every conceivable niche on the planet. And so we get an amazing diversity of frogs in terms of color, in terms of body size. We get our huge bullfrogs up in Joburg. We get frogs that weigh up to 3 kilograms, right down to the smallest frog, which is less than the size of your pinky nail and is the smallest vertebrate on the planet. So there's this incredible diversity, and that's reflected in this amazing range of adaptations and life history traits that are really, really fascinating. And certainly for me, it's been an amazing journey to learn about how these animals are adapted to their different habitats around the world. Just a bit of history and how I got into frogs. So yes, I went from not really knowing much about them, not even liking them very much, but I joined the Northwest University in 2006 to do a master's in environmental science. And there I met Louis Duprier, and he was leading the African Amphibian Conservation Research Group. And he offered me a project looking at 2 river frog species up in the Drakensberg. There was a lot of confusion around their classification, going back to their history in the early 1900s. And my job was essentially to go up into these mountains and into Lesotho and look at these frogs and try and sort out these classification issues. And having come from work in London for a number of years, it was just really a phenomenal experience to be out in these mountains where I grew up and learning about these fascinating creatures. So that was my master's. I then went on to a PhD, and this really started to focus me in on conservation. So I was looking at all the threatened species around South Africa. I was very lucky to be able to travel around the whole of South Africa, focusing on 20 different species that are threatened in South Africa, and having a look in particular at the chytrid fungal disease. So you can see in that picture there, I'm swabbing a western leopard toad from Cape Town. It's an endangered species down on the Cape Peninsula. And I'm swabbing its skin for this fungal disease. And this disease is probably the worst pandemic on the planet. We talk about, obviously, coronavirus at the moment, but these poor frogs as a group have been facing their own pandemic for the last 20 years. And it's been shown to infect more than 500 species around the planet. So it's a real problem for frogs globally, and my job there was to look at whether it was more of a threat to our already threatened species. What we found is that certainly the fungus is here, and it occurs in a number of our threatened species, but our species are not susceptible to the disease in terms of the negative impacts and the declines and deaths that we're seeing in the tropics, for example. So traveling around and looking at these different threatened species really started to open my eyes to the need for applied conservation practice in South Africa. There's a lot of research being done, a lot of university groups working on frogs, but not a lot of this was being translated into on-the-ground conservation action. And that is when I joined the Endangered Wildlife Trust in 2012 and initiated the Threatened Amphibian program for them. And yeah, one of my first goals really was to bridge that gap between research and conservation action, and taking a lot of what I had learned in my PhD and applying that to conservation. So we directly try and minimize those threats. All of our work is focused on threatened amphibians around South Africa, and then of course working to change behaviors that impact negatively on our environment and on our frogs as well. So for the first 3 years in the Threatened Amphibian program with EWT, I worked largely on my own, really trying to establish the program and raise funding to support the work we're doing. The first funding I got was for the critically endangered Amatola toad, which during my PhD I rediscovered in a way it hadn't been seen for 13 years. And that rediscovery was really the catalyst for securing some funding through the Critical Ecosystem Partnership Fund to look for this toad up in the Amatola area. And that work continues today. And I'll talk a bit more about that just now. So my little TAP team has grown quite significantly since 2012. We welcomed Cherise Acker in 2015. She runs our NRM programs, looking at alien clearing on the KZN coast, focused on the endangered Pickersgill's reed frog. Jiba Magwaza is our field officer, and he joined us also in 2015. And then more recently, Joshua Weber joined us down in Cape Town. He's in our Cape Town office, and he works on the Table Mountain ghost frog. We've also started doing a lot of work with nerds, Keir and Eloise Lynch, and they are based also in the Western Cape and are helping us with work down there as well as in the Eastern Cape. Going back to bridging that gap between research and conservation, I've also worked with many students over the years, and they really help us to strengthen the evidence for the conservation work that we're doing. So we've grown to be a large team. In fact, we're probably the biggest group of people directly working in amphibian conservation in the country. We are now a team of 7, and as you've seen, working in different areas on different threatened species. And of course, the work that we do is hugely dependent on other partners outside of the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and then of course on funders from around the world. So that brings us to the Whitley Awards. I applied for the award in October last year. It involved many a late night, a lot of burning the candle on both ends, working through this very complex budget. But really what I put down on paper was that history of my work, over 48 pages of application. And that in itself, I felt was worth some recognition. So I'm glad that somebody read it. I was one of 112 applicants for this year's award. And in February this year, I heard the really good news that I've been shortlisted in the top 15 with other candidates from around the world. We then waited until early March, and I then heard that I was in the top 6 of those shortlisted candidates. There was then a lot of work with the Whitley Fund for Nature, answering a few more questions for them, and then heard on the 29th of April this year that indeed I was one of the 6 winners. And also just to mention here that the William Burke Charitable Trust support my Whitley Award through supporting the Whitley Fund for Nature. So it's quite an interesting model of how the funding works. But yes, I'm extremely grateful to both the Whitley Fund for Nature and the William Burke Charitable Trust for supporting my work. And it's just a huge recognition of my work and of the need for amphibian conservation, both on a global level and in South Africa. So what will I be doing with the award money? So the award is £40,000 to be used over a period of 12 months, which we have just started on now in June. And also to mention part of that application process, I had to give 3 references, and they were from a local, regional and international level. My local referee was Adrian Armstrong. I work very closely with him. He works for KZN Wildlife in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and I've worked with him extensively, especially on the Pickersgill reed frog work. Louis Depree, I mentioned that he was my supervisor for both my master's and my PhD. And then Helen Meredith, who is the director of the Amphibian Survival Alliance based in the UK. And I met her a number of years ago at a conference in Vancouver. And just a big thank you to all of them for speaking to Whitley. I know they had extensive interviews about my work, and then for writing really great letters of recommendation on my work. So I think without them, I would not have got that far either. So there I am, one of the 6 winners for this year. We have a great diversity of people from all around the world. Puncho from Bhutan, me there from South Africa, Yoki from Indonesia. Patty in the middle there is this year's gold winner, and she is from Brazil, working on tapirs. So the gold winner is a previous Whitley Award winner who then is selected for the gold award, which is an additional award for previous winners. Rachel from Nigeria, Gabriela also from Brazil, and Ali from Kenya, all working on a wide range of different species. And you can have a look at the Whitley website to see what each of those different projects is about. Of course, as we are doing now, everything is via Zoom. So after the announcement on the 29th of April, I got to meet all of the other winners and the Whitley team over Zoom, and that was really great just to meet everyone and learn what everyone's doing. Right, so just zooming in on this project that I'll be doing that the Whitley Award is supporting. I am looking at 8 different threatened species across South Africa, across 3 provinces, so KwaZulu-Natal, where I am based and where most of my work has been to date, and then down in the Eastern Cape. And what the Whitley Award is providing is a real opportunity to expand our work into the Western Cape. And so that's really exciting, looking at a number of new species there. So here in KZN, we're looking at 2 endangered species on the KZN coastline. Pickersgill's reed frog, which has been really a focal of my attention since my PhD. The species was critically endangered. We knew of it from about 8 sites, and through our work, we now know of it at 38 sites, and it's been downlisted to endangered, which, given the trajectory of amphibians globally, is really quite a significant achievement. And through ongoing work, we hope to further downgrade the threat status of that species by securing more habitat for it, managing that habitat, and discovering new sites. The kloof frog, which you can see on the right, is a really handsome little species. These egg clumps that we monitor, and as you can see by the distribution, these species co-occur quite closely. So that's our focus for KZN. And looking at swamp forest and Indian Ocean belt coastal wetland, which both of those in themselves are threatened habitat types. So we're working extensively with landowners and communities to improve the management and protection of these sites. Down in the Eastern Cape, I mentioned the little Amatola toad, which I rediscovered and was the first species that I secured funding for through the EWT. Continuing to work here to secure habitat through the Whitley Award, looking at up to 30,000 hectares of protection for the species, which currently doesn't occur in any protected areas. We are hopefully going to declare our first nature reserve for the species this year on privately owned land of 1,200 hectares. And that's really exciting to have the first declared nature reserve for this critically endangered species. And as you can see, this beautiful grassland up in the montane region of the Eastern Cape, which has otherwise been really quite transformed by plantations in the area. And then moving into the Western Cape, so we're looking at 4 species there. The rough moss frog, which is one of our smallest frogs in the country, and this is my favorite name for a frog, the moonlight mountain toadlet. You can see from those distribution, the orange blobs there on the maps, that these species are hugely restricted, only occurring in a very small part of the Western Cape. And there we'll be working to understand the threats facing these species, the opportunities for habitat protection, and improved management within these small areas. Down on the Cape Peninsula, we're looking at 3 species, the Table Mountain ghost frog, which occurs only on Table Mountain in 7 streams. We were fortunate a few months ago to discover it in a new stream, and that's its global range. And so we're working very closely there with the authorities, sandparks, to improve the management of those streams. Even though the species occurs entirely within a protected area, those streams need improved management to ensure the long-term survival of this really fascinating species. It's called a ghost frog because it occurs in these crevices and ravines, and was named for being discovered in Skeleton Gorge. The toad in the middle is the western leopard toad. That's the same species that you saw me swabbing in an earlier slide. It's also endangered, occurs only on the peninsula, and is very threatened by urbanization, and in particular by roadkill in these very concentrated urban areas down in the Cape Flats. And then the third one is the micro frog, also one of our smallest species in the country, and again looking at management to improve the habitat for this little species. So that's the habitat for the Table Mountain ghost frog. These amazing streams. You can see the Giza lilies there, and one of the streams where the frog occurs is and it's named after this beautiful flower. All right, maybe onto the more boring stuff, but it's really important part of the work that we do, and that is developing strategies and conservation plans to guide the conservation and management actions. And so on a local level, I will be completing the biodiversity management plan for the western leopard toad down in the Western Cape. And I have experience in doing this for the Pickersgill's reed frog. This was the first BMP, as we call it, for a threatened frog in South Africa. We started in 2013. It was gazetted by government, so these are government endorsed plans in 2016, and this has really helped guide our conservation work for Pickersgill's reed frog, and has really seen very successful partnerships in implementing those conservation actions. I will also be revising the next 10-year strategy for South African frogs across the country, so building on the middle document that you see there for the next 10 years. And then I've also recently been appointed as the regional chair for the Amphibian Specialist Group, as well as a co-chair for the Amphibian Specialist Group Habitat Protection Working Group, and for that I'll be writing the chapter on habitat protection in the newly revised Amphibian Conservation Action Plan. So you can see that this kind of work reaches across local, regional, and international levels, and is a really important part of how we work to guide conservation for amphibians. A big part of my work, which will also be supported by the Whitley Award, and is really the most exciting part of my work, I think, and that is the creating social change and environmental education about frogs. It's just really great to see the changes in people's faces as they realize that frogs aren't these scary things and that they're really interesting. And so getting people out at night into nature and looking for frogs is a big part of the work we do. We have developed several educational packages that you can also find online on the EWT website that have been quite popular now during the lockdown. You're welcome to use those resources. And then we're also working towards developing ecotourism on the KZN coastline with our KZN frog route, looking at Pickersgill reed frog sites up and down the coast and developing an ecotourism type model similar to birding in KZN. So watch this space for those. The Whitley Award has generated a huge amount of media in the last 2 months since the award was announced. There are lots of articles that have been written in newspapers and online. And then just this week, the Crest magazine, which is the Upper Highway magazine, is making it its cover story. And on the 6th of July, the story will be featured on 50/50. So that's on Monday nights on SABC2, our long-running 50/50. And they've covered my work for many years. So it's really great that they're following up with this. So we look forward to seeing that. Right, so I don't want to be the only person doing conservation work on frogs. There's a lot to do, and really getting the public involved is one of the best ways where you can make a difference too. And so there's some simple ways to do that. All the sort of obvious stuff that you can do in your homes and gardens to improve the environment around you. Avoid the use of poisons, pesticides, herbicides in your home and garden. Planting indigenous in your garden, they use less water and they also attract the insects that frogs like to eat. Slow down for frogs on rainy nights. So frogs are hibernating now in winter, but when the rains start coming, we start to see lots of frogs using the roads, especially the toads, at nighttime, and just have some consciousness of that and try not to flat them. All that good stuff you can do for the environment, reduce, reuse, recycle, you know, all this plastic that gets into our freshwater systems obviously directly impacts on amphibians themselves, but also on our water quality. Don't keep frogs as pets. So frogs are totally awesome. There's very cool ones, but actually taking them out of the wild and wanting to keep these colorful, interesting animals as pets is not a good idea. It spreads the chytrid disease I spoke about, and you're obviously taking frogs out of their natural environment, and we don't want to do that. And tell other people how cool frogs are. So one of the best things you can do is learn more about frogs and spread the word. Some other practical suggestions, of course, in spring, as toads and frogs come out to breed, lots of them end up in our pools, which are too steep for them to get back out of. So you can install a toad saver, which in its simplest form is a bit of shade cloth or netting over the side of the pool, held in place by a rock, and have rocks or planks in the pool so that the frogs can climb out again. Now in winter, many frogs are moving inside. Lots of people tell me that they find these dried up frogs in their houses. If you do find any frogs inside, move them back outside, make little hideaways for them. Simply overturned pot plants will do the job, and that provides them a bit of shelter and prevents them from drying out in your house. And as I say, the best thing you can do is actually learn more about your local frogs. There are plenty of resources. We have our, I think we have 13 regional posters now on the frogs of South Africa. You're welcome to get hold of me to get those for your area. And then there are children's books. There's an app, and there is the grown-up app, if you like, based on the complete guide book to frogs, and that comes complete with videos, all the calls. And yeah, once spring rolls around, then get out there with your headlamps, sit back with a glass of wine and listen to the frogs and see what you can identify. And that's really the best way to start getting into frogs. So yeah, the future of frogs really is in all of our hands. Thank you very much for listening. And we can now go to the Q&A and see if you have any questions. Thank you. I hope that was okay. I think the connection might have been a bit bad. So I'm just going to read through the various questions. So Heidi said the line went down, that she was asking about the second frog species on the KZN coast that we're researching, as well as the swamp forest. So Heidi, if you are still there, that is the kloof frog, Nutella petrarchus boneburger. It is an endangered species that occurs in these riparian forests, and the work that we do on it is largely around monitoring it, looking at its egg clumps, but then also working to improve the management of these forested areas. And swamp forest is a hugely endangered habitat type, so where we can also trying to formally protect areas that include swamp forest and work towards both municipal and provincial targets for that habitat. Okay, then Eleanor says, oh, she's corrected me on my botanics. She says she's loving the presentation, but the Disa is an orchid and not a lily. But thank you for that. Penny Abbott says, what are the key features in the management plans for these species? Thanks, Penny. So the management plans follow a very specific format, and essentially what we try and do is identify the major threats facing the species and then develop objectives and actions to address those threats. And in addition to that, we lay out timeframes to do those actions and identify the key stakeholders of who is responsible for actually implementing those actions. So I hope that answers that question. In terms of the global plan, there are various themes that we look at. As I mentioned, I'm in charge of the habitat protection chapter, and that involves obviously looking at the different ways around the world that we can protect habitat. In South Africa, we use a system called biodiversity stewardship, where we work with private and community landowners to formally declare habitat. And then Eleanor says she once found a bullfrog in a flower pot outside her kitchen door in Johannesburg. She left it alone and it disappeared the next day. Where would it have come from? She has no pond in the garden and should have done something better, something to help it to a better space. So the amazing thing with frogs is that they will just move around and appear in your garden if you have suitable habitat. Frogs actually travel very significant distances from water. So over winter, they can actually move kilometers away from their breeding sites, and they do this to forage and to find overwintering sites. So I think the fact that it was there and then moved away probably just shows that it may have been moving through, probably foraging. So I think it was fine by leaving it. As I say, it's always better to actually take the frogs back outside rather than leaving them inside. And Natasha Kruger says, thanks for your presentation and organizing the Leap Day for frogs every year. So I didn't mention that. We do organize an annual awareness event every year called Leap Day for Frogs. I gave a webinar in April, and that speaks a lot more about how interesting frogs are and a bit more about the Leap Day. So you can also look on the EWT YouTube channel for that. But thanks, Natasha. It's really one of our highlights of the year. And Robin asks, have you heard of the organization Toad Nuts? And do you think this organization is worth supporting? So yes, Robin, we've actually worked quite closely with the Toad Nuts in the past. So they are the Toad Savers down in Noordhoek in Cape Town. They're a volunteer group, and it really is their passion to save the endangered western leopard toad from being killed on the roads. And we supported them a number of years ago in a trial to look at barrier fencing to prevent these toads from getting onto the road. And them and a number of other volunteer organizations on the peninsula work to save the Western leopard toad. So yes, I do think they are worth supporting, and the Western leopard toad is, through the Whitley Award, going to be one of the species that we focus on. Karine asks, there's a huge threat to frogs because of a fungus. How to avoid that fungus spreading more? So yes, that's the chytrid fungus that I spoke of. It is a very big threat to frogs globally. And the way we can prevent that spreading is, as I mentioned, don't get frogs as pets, don't eat frogs, really don't, when you can in your own way, object to any trade of wildlife. And the reason that we have a human pandemic now is because of trade in wildlife. And so the best thing we can do is to really object to any wildlife trade, and locally don't be moving frogs around out of their natural habitats. As I say, our South African frogs appear to be resistant to the fungus, but what we don't want to see is other strains of the fungus coming into South Africa and affecting our local frogs. So really, by not supporting any wildlife trade, whether it's in the pet trade or the food trade, that's how we can do that in our own way. Thank you. Not sure if there are any other questions. I think I've run through those all. But thank you very much for attending and for your questions. And as I say, if you want to listen to some of our other webinars, go to the YouTube channel, and you're welcome to contact me on my email address there if you have any other specific frog related or Wiki Award related questions. Thanks very much.